anybody individually, I'll throw out there that what does the Catholic Church teach about the way to salvation? What's the path to salvation? Sponsors, you can chip in anytime you want to.
Come on, you guys. Don't be shy.
It's only one word.
Fire. Oh, no. How the other?
Faith. Faith. Remember, Paul talks about faith is the path, that all other things are secondary to faith. And so, our faith is centered on the idea that Christ is present in the Word, but most of all, that Christ is present in the Eucharist. And however, elsewhere, it is said in our gospel that, and I can't tell you exactly, quote the chapter and verse, but faith is empty without works. So you don't earn yourself to heaven, you have faith in Christ, but by having faith in Christ, you are committed to following Christ and you are committed to good works. Now, this is Catholic teaching, but this is actually world teaching. Every human being on the surface of this planet has embedded in them the idea to do what is good. We believe that. I believe that. So what you're hearing this morning is through the lens of the Catholic faith, but it is not unique to Catholics, obviously. So, and we are talking about Catholic social justice, and I can tell you this, that recently, within the last few months, we formed, Father Tom formed, and Mike Genetti had something to do with this too. We formed what we call a social justice committee. But one of the very first things that Father told us is that social justice, that phrase, has become very political in this day and age that we live in. And so he's very cautious about, as a committee, our focus is not on social justice as a political issue. And so we are, above all things, to try to avoid politicizing any aspect of our actions. And that's easier said than done, because unfortunately, we know that in this world, you take an issue which is what we would call a social justice issue, and you'll have many opinions on whether it is an issue, or if it is an issue, what's the solution to that issue, and so it becomes very politicized. And it's not, social justice issues are not monopolized by one political party or the other, or one by liberals or conservatives. Social justice is something we all inherit. It's inherent, like I said, it's inherent in us. And so one of the first things we did was decided that we would not call ourselves a social justice committee, that we would call ourselves Life and Justice. And that kind of just tried to depoliticize it, to say that justice within us is it's just a part of life. I mean, it's a part of everyone's life. And we, as Christians, as followers of Christ, are called to follow in his footsteps. And no one was more concerned with justice than Jesus. And he was not, it was, for him, justice was not something that, you know, on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock, he would run down and do justice. It was embedded in his life, his whole ministry. And of course, the ultimate act of justice was, kind of ironically, our sins, which we could justly say we deserve to be punished for, he took upon himself, died on a cross, and then came back for us. So that's where faith and justice all come together in Christ. So we're going to go over the history of the church, but I thought it would be wise to kind of comment on that. Let's see, here we go. So where do we get this justice from? Like I said, I believe it's inherent in us as human beings, that God gives us desire for a just life, and to be just, we have to have foundations of morality. So of all the creatures on this earth, we are the ones who, I would like to say we are the ones who are given a choice. God gives us a free will to choose. I'm not to say that a zebra can't choose to become and live as an alligator, but his lifespan wouldn't be very long if he did that. So everything in the earth, I think, can choose, but I think most things are compelled to stay as they are. And in a way, we are as well, because although we have the ability to choose, God made us in his image. And if he made us in his image, then we are, you know, when we go to default, that should be about where we end up, as in his image and loving as he loves. So, but in the real world, we know that we have these choices and actions that we can make in terms of how we live our lives and how we see that justice is done. And the source of how we make choices, the source of our morality falls into three different areas: natural law, divine law, and church law. So natural law, in relating it to social justice, some examples that I would give would be like love of children is inherent, that all creatures, and natural law, of course, encompasses more than human beings, encompasses the whole world, but all creatures really have a love of children, or at least the idea that they are here to procreate. And if you don't have to look too far to say that even in our Constitution, or in our Declaration of Independence, I guess it's the Constitution, a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which, by the way, is not necessarily the same natural law that other countries necessarily practice, and sometimes we don't either, but that's what our goal is. Divine law is doing God's will, and God and others are above self. So we are created to love, but our focus is on loving others, the self-giving in our love. And that's the image of what God's love is. And so that is kind of carried out in the commandments, Old Testament teachings, and especially in the New Testament, the Beatitudes, and some of the other New Testament teachings. So divine law, in some sense, can be very close to natural law. So in our commandments, it says, "Thou shalt not kill." Well, how many of us get up every morning and say, "Okay, I'm really not gonna kill anybody today. I might want to kill a few people, but I'm not going to do that." No, because it's just basically inherent that it's, for most people, it's abhorrent to think of injuring somebody or purposely killing somebody. So, so if you looked in, I'm not going to go through these. Sometimes I go and have you look them up, but just they're there in writing for you. So if you want to look back, you know, one of the things that I think that Janelin would probably second this is that in all of the teachings we've given you, there's a basis in Scripture for everything we say. So sometimes if you're not of the Catholic faith and from our brothers in the Protestant religions, they focus very strongly on the Bible. And so sometimes when Catholics come out and have something stamped as Catholic, they might react to that and say, "Well, is it in the Bible?" And so we're very aware of that, and we base everything we do is based on Jesus' teachings. Finally, church law is really subject to divine law and natural law. It is not something that a couple bishops or cardinals sat around one day and said, "Hey, let's make up this law and make life miserable for people." It really just gives the detail or the interpretation of what already exists. So if you look at what goes on today, there are several sources within the church that are places where you can find this interpretation called church law. So the magisterium, which is the collective wisdom of the church, not just the Pope, but all those who surround him, including us. Encyclicals specifically sometimes come out, position papers that the Pope will write. So the one that comes to mind for for our current Pope is the one on environmental care. You may have read about that. What is it? Second question? I'm asking because I can't remember the name.
Care of the earth?
Gaudium something?
Yeah.
Gaudium lumen? I don't know. It means light of the earth or light for the earth. And then letters and commissions. And so many times in this country, the Catholic bishops get together and will come out with a position paper on some issue. And many times these issues are on social justice. So we're not going to go through all these, but you can see that here's just a list of some of the teachings that came out of the Vatican, or positions that came out of the Vatican. And I guess I would just point out that, for instance, one on the condition of labor was Pope Leo back in 1891, one of the very first ones. Well, you know what was going on in 1891 was it was the Industrial Revolution, and so many people who used to work out on the farm were coming into the city, and they were going to work in factories, and it was pretty grim. Men and women and children were forced into these factories just by the economic circumstances, and conditions were terrible, so that's what that came out. Let me see. Of course, around Vatican II, there were lots of things that came out, and they had one of the documents that came out of Vatican II was the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, and Pope John the 23rd, his whole focus was on the idea that the church was still dedicated to God's law and natural law, but that the world had changed and was changing so fast that many people didn't know how to interpret those laws. And so this was a chance to interpret those laws in light of what was going on in the world. And so if you ever want to pick one document to go back and take a look at, that might be a good one because it just kind of covers a whole broad spectrum of issues that were going on at the time. One of the big things, by the way, that was going on at that time was the Cold War. The whole issue of the military growing bigger and bigger in many different countries, and people, quite rightly, were literally concerned about our existence, that we were going to blow each other up at some point. And instead of everybody getting blown up at once, we're just doing a little bit at a time, I guess. But important things are discussed at that Vatican Council. And then 1995, John Paul II really was kind of a follow-up to Vatican II. The whole idea of the gospel of life and the dignity of the individual. And so it was a reaction to Roe versus Wade is what it was. So pro-life and a concern for the dignity of the individual, whether they be unborn or end of life. There it is, our care for our common home. That was Pope Francis.
Deacon Phil, how many encyclicals, are those all the encyclicals?
No, there are more than that. I just picked some.
Sure.
Anytime any of this stuff, where I get it is off of the Vatican website. If you go there, it's not all in Latin, so you can figure out what's going on. So I would recommend that too. And then these are just a sampling of letters from the bishops in our country. And so 1979, there was one on racism, economic justice for all, 1986. That was really in the heart of the, I guess I'd call it the stock market grab. I mean, guys were grabbing and buying and selling stocks and becoming millionaires overnight, and it seemed like more and more people were turning away from God and turning into materialism. Let's see. There's one in 2001 on global climate change. So they're all very topical, so you can see. You don't find anywhere in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not emit carbon dioxide. I mean, it's not there. So we have to have the church step in and give us some background. Now I might add that this isn't just, again, not a few cardinals sitting around a table saying, well, what do you think about global warming? They will establish commissions that will go out and talk to scientists and other people around the world that are considered experts to get information. So it's not in a vacuum. I mean, it's really connected to what is really trying to go on, is really going on in the world. And then there's one, the culture of life and the penalty of death. So that's on capital punishment. So let's start with life and dignity of the human person, which the church teaching holds it above all else, which makes sense. So the respect for life and the dignity of an individual is paramount to everything else, whether it's the world, environment, whether it's how labor is involved. I mean, it all comes back to life and the respect for life. So life is sacred and each person has inherent dignity, and so all of these topics are triggered by that statement. So the gospel of life, abortion, euthanasia, capital punishment, the idea of a just war, which is a pretty narrow definition. So that's a tough one because we're a very patriotic country. We honor those who have fallen, but on the other hand, our attitude we call for is that it should be a just cause, that it's not about us gaining power over another people or punishing people. It's about what is truly justice. End of life issues and science and research. Reproduction. Can you imagine, walking up to St. Paul and saying to him, well, what do you think about cloning? And he'd say, huh? What are you talking about? So that's a good example of how the technology that we live in, society that we live in, has changed so much that the church has to have an answer to many of these things because they do become they are moral issues in that we would think, okay, what is the issue around having another person created off of another person? And it's not that God would say, well, God, you're a clone, so you're not any good. You're just like secondhand. No, but it is around what might be sacrificed to attain that goal, or what research might be involved in attaining that goal, and then the second thing would be, what are you doing once you reach your goal? Are you going to use that clone as a body part reservoir for me so that I have spare parts when I need them? I mean, this sounds weird, but all you got to do is read science fiction, and today's science fiction is tomorrow's reality. It just is the case. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
There was actually a case in the United States of a family that had a baby. In order to use the stem cells from that baby,
Treat the father
to save the life of another child.
Right.
But throughout the baby's lifetime, they went through amazingly hard things, including multiple bone marrow transplants and things that were very painful in order to save the life of the sibling. So it can be a very sticky wicket.
Right. Very emotional. By the way, this stuff we're talking about, even though there's, teachings from the church, it's still not all settled. I mean, many things are still kind of up in the air, and many people have different opinions. So if I'm talking about something you don't understand, or you're saying, I'm not sure about that, feel free to break in and we'll talk about it. So, Gospel of Life states that from the moment of conception to natural death, human dignity is to be respected. It's the basis of human rights, created by God and redeemed by Christ. And in any aspect of life that we encounter, the idea is that we do good and we do not do harm. And that specifically will apply to medical care. That when a doctor is making a decision about your future health, that he has to choose options that are meant to do good and not to do harm. This also includes religious freedom. When I worked in a hospital, that's what I think Janelyn was referring to, that I had some qualifications, at the hospital I was actually on their ethics committee, so we would review a lot of cases, but within our Catholic hospital, and it was a Catholic hospital, so we did have discussion about, for instance, I believe it's Jehovah's Witness that do not believe in receiving blood. And so the hospital is committed to respecting that and had forms that people would sign upon entry that they would say they were willing to receive a transfusion if necessary, and then they would give them the opportunity to cross that out. There are cases where we've encountered that principle, and usually sometimes it can even end up in court where there's a court order for a child to receive a blood product, because it's not just blood because of an acute injury. It could be platelets, things that people getting undergoing treatment for different cancers might utilize and prolong life. So, like I said, many things are in the law, but they're still debated, and sometimes they end up in court. Principles of integrity and totality. Those are words that basically are describing the idea that as a human being, I'm entitled to being viewed as a whole person. So I don't know about you guys, but I have run into this in my lifetime regarding my parents, especially in their later years, that they end up with like 8 different doctors, and one for your kidneys, one for your lungs, one for your heart. And so if you haven't noticed, had that experience yet, it sometimes feels like the doctors who takes care of your heart is only concerned about getting your heart working and keeping it working, and he kind of ignores what the other guys are doing. And so it's frustrating, because you want to say, you know, my mom is not just a heart, she's a whole human being, and just because you're taking care of that part, you need to pay attention to what's going on in the rest of her life. And so with my father, on one day his general practitioner told us he's failing and he's coming to the end, and the next day I walk into the room and he's getting a blood transfusion. And I'm like, why are they giving him blood? Because he's at the end, the literal end. So that's a good example of integrity and totality, that he doesn't deserve that kind of treatment because of where he is and what his health is and so forth. Maybe a more dramatic illustration would be if you're getting, if you have a brain tumor and the doctor says, well, there's a 95% chance that after the surgery you're going to be blind, or you're going to be a vegetable. And you say, well, how much time do I have if I don't do anything? And he says, well, maybe a month. It's up to you. You have the right to choose, and the church supports that. You have the right to choose, because you're maintaining your integrity as a whole human being, and if that's going to last for a month, as opposed to a 1% chance of lasting 6 months and being blind or not being able to hear or what have you, you can make that choice. And so, see, it's not all black and white at the end of, oh yes, do whatever you can to keep their heart beating. No, that's not church teaching. You're entitled to your functionality as a human being. On the other hand, if the doctor said there was a 90% chance of recovery and a 10% chance that you would be blind after the procedure, then the church is going to look at that a little different. But again, when you get into this stuff, it's not just black and white and easy. It's tough decisions to make. But as a son or a daughter dealing with parents or other people in your family, it is some reassurance to know that, you know, no matter what you do, sometimes you feel guilty for what's going on with the other person. But no matter what you do, it's some reassurance to know that the church has these guidelines. And they're actually called Ethical and Religious Directive for Catholic Healthcare Centers Services. And so it's nice to know they're there, although it's better to know they're there and understand them before you get to that moment of crisis when emotions take over and you just, you know, you're overwhelmed. And so that's why out there they have these living wills and healthcare directives that as a person you can sign. So that gives them added reassurance that this is what mom or dad wanted, and so I'm not going against their wishes, and I'm not going against God's desire either. So there's some good things that come out.
I can speak to that. I met with our priest and asked about some things with my mother. She was 85 years old. She had Alzheimer's. She had not set up any living wills or anything like that. And she was incapable by that time to do that. And my mom was 5'10", and she weighed 102 pounds. She was just emaciated. She lost all of her appetite. And the doctor said, well, we can give her hormones to increase her appetite. But that was really hard for me to know what the right thing was to do, because we knew she was terminal, we knew she was at the end, but we made the decision, we'll try it, and if her appetite comes back, great, she's choosing to eat, and if it doesn't work because of the brain atrophy or whatever. But it was very comforting to be able to go to the priest and say, tell me how I can look at this and make a good moral decision.
Joe, along the same lines, this may happen to each and every one of you. It did to me. This split our family.
Oh, yeah.
My grandmother, bless her soul, she was in a bad situation, but her husband and my uncle did everything to keep her alive. The feeding tube, and to the point where my grandma was screaming and scratching her face, but they put gloves on her hands. But there's half the family says, you know, the other half, definitely not. We have to do everything possible to keep her alive. So this is something you have to deal with.
It's real and it's tough.
Yeah.
Very tough.
Bill, isn't it like, who are you keeping alive for? You or for them?
Right.
That's the ultimate thing, you and them.
And we were talking about older people here, but when it comes, suddenly it involves a young person, you know, add on, because we all have stories, and I'll tell this story, and then it'll be fun. But my brother's grandson, in his late 20s, was out in the barn with his two sons, and he was working on something up in the rafters, and he fell. And he basically landed on his head, and he actually got up and walked around for a few moments, and then he collapsed. And he eventually was transported to the hospital, and about 4 days later, most of his doctors said, you know, he's not going to recover from this massive head trauma. And they would start talking about organ donation. And so we were all prepared for the worst. And then on the Monday, they were going to have this discussion about the organ donation. Another doctor showed up on the scene, don't know where he came from. But he said, wait a minute. He said, this is way, way, way too early to make that decision. And I'm not convinced that there's still hope for this guy. And I don't know what his basis was, but he stuck to his guns. And so they waited. And all I can tell you is this young man is back to work, living a normal life. And I had various people around. Now here's where prayer comes in. How important prayer is, because I had them praying for him. He had two young sons. He was a single dad, and I mean, it was such a tough situation. Now, not every prayer is answered that way, but in this case, it wasn't. It was enough to give us hope in something more than what what the message may be and what the answer may be, so.
I want to make a little plug that the #1 killer of young adults is automobile accidents. It is never too early to talk about end-of-life decisions.
Right. I know when you go in to get your driver's license, they ask about it. Now, I will, I'm not discouraging organ donation because the church supports that, hospitals support it, but they're cautious, and the hospital I worked at was like, it wasn't just something they gave mouth to. I mean, individual cases, a nurse would come forward and say, look, you know, this patient was, we were way early in the process, and already the organ donor people were there, you know, kind of talking to the family a little bit. And so, you know, we took some action and said to that, there's usually most hospitals deal with a single agency that gets the organ donors. And we talked to them and said, you know, you don't come here until you're called. You know, don't come here until you're called. And I know they're, you know, this is the world we live in, that those people are not evil. I mean, they see the need. So many times life and justice are in conflict with each other, and you need someone to step forward and say, no, this is not right, or we can wait. So, those in positions of authority recognize that individuals have a right to participate in decisions that directly affect them. We've actually come a long way in this regard, and so that doctors more and more do feel obligated to inform the patient or their family of what's going on in their life, and get their input on what steps to take next. Now, that's easy to say, but many of us in those situations, especially at emotional situations, are more like to say, whatever you think is best, doctor. I mean, we don't want to be responsible, and we're just too busy emotionally connected to what's going on to really want that, but at least it needs to be offered. And oftentimes within the family there's a couple people that might be in a position where they can hang in there and get that input and then talk heart to heart. Most doctors are not experts at sitting down with somebody and talking to them about the issues of life and death. They're there to heal, do good, do not harm. And so to keep the person alive is their goal. But, you know, death is a natural process for all of us, and although it comes unexpectedly and tragically, it's part of what being a human being, we believe in the next life. And so, you know, it's so difficult, but doctors are not used to talking about that stuff. That's why we have priests. Benefits and burdens should be distributed in a just manner. Benefits and burdens. So, same way, it could even be somewhat of an economic decision. That if John is terribly sick and he needs a series of treatments and surgeries that total up to bankrupting the family, and with very little, minimal chance of any improvement in John's life, then it's okay to say goodbye and for John to make the decision that, you know what, I don't want that treatment. Now, while we're talking about treatment, I'll backstep a little bit here, and you mentioned the feeding tube. Withdrawing nutrition is part of the living will, and you can withdraw nutrition. Pretty much the only thing you can't do is withdraw hydration. Dying of thirst, literally, because you're not getting an IV, is a very painful process, and so we do not let that happen. No matter what shape the patient is in, if they need hydration like that, they'll get hydration. And there are a few other things that are just there to maintain some pain-free moments for them. So, but there are things you can do to let life and death take its course. So that's even part of the directives. Any other comments or questions? Very painful to talk about some of this, but
Bill even had an argument over how much morphine should be administered. You know, we were hitting a big, yeah, it was tough.
Very timely, end of life, and refusal of treatment. So, just summarizing, proportionate is equal to treatment that in the given circumstances offers a reasonable hope of benefit and is not too burdensome for the patients of others. Any treatment given the circumstances either offers no reasonable hope of benefit or is too burdensome for the patients of others. So that's disproportionate. Okay, so, what were you talking about?
Morphine.
Oh, morphine.
How much should be
Painkiller.
administered, and we were,
So the church teaches no euthanasia, right? So that's a deliberate act of killing somebody. And the use of morphia at the end of life is very common. And my mother was taking it at the end of her life because she was in terrible pain. And in hospice, they basically leave a bottle there, a dropper bottle that you put so many drops as needed. And it becomes a very gray area as to how much morphine the patient's getting. And so it's not euthanasia, but it's comfort. And so do some people maybe go over what's recommended? Well, we don't live our lives necessarily by strictly what's recommended. So
tough.
these are tough
That
decisions. So, but if you took the whole bottle and dumped it down Grandma's throat, you know, that's another thing altogether. But if people are on the borderline, you withhold judgment, I guess is what I would say that.
And with hospice, they have to account for the drugs given.
That's right, they don't
and
just
the
give you
drugs turned in at end of life,
Right,
so
so-
if you did that,
The 2 whole bottles are missing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it probably has less to do with euthanasia and more to do with it getting sold out there on the market. Any other comments or questions? Now that I got everybody, you know, in a good mood. Okay. Social justice is about, believe it or not, is about joy. So, you know, don't, it's about a lot of tough things, but it's still at the end is joy. And by following these just actions, at the end you can feel some joy that even in the most dire circumstances, that you did what was right, you know. And the person that is involved would probably, if they weren't busy about dying, busy about the work of dying, they would have probably agreed absolutely with you. So I don't know if Grandma was in that situation enough, but we definitely knew the wishes of my mom and dad when their time had come.
There's a certain amount of relief that they're out of pain.
Oh yeah,
I mean, it's sad.
if you had that faith, then you believe that they are going to go another place where there is no pain and there's no suffering. So, call to family, community, and participation. So, relating to social justice, sort of goes back to the Constitution. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are not individual. Americans love to think of themselves as I'm an individual. I can handle anything. I can do anything I need to do for me or for my family. But we have to have the reality that we are part of a worldwide community. And more I've come to believe this, that we're tribe. We are tribe, and that's how our ancestors sprang up, and they formed tribes, and they were dedicated to their tribe. We just have to take the mentality that ultimately we are part of our huge tribe that's called the world of people, you know. But within our lives, we are still drawn to a tribe, and so I like to think that I have 2 tribes that I belong to: my family, which we're very close, and St. Al's. St. Al's is my tribe, and so to get by in this world with all this stuff going on out there, everybody needs a tribe that they can be a part of. If you don't have a tribe, it's hard to get by, and so I'm praying for you all, and I'm hoping that soon you'll be a part of our tribe. And we will treat you like part of our tribe and be welcome. So the person is not only sacred, but is also social. And so because we are a tribe, then we need to be concerned about economics and politics and law. And the church really believes that marriage and the family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened, not undermined. So many of the social justice commentaries you hear coming out of the church, which in many cases may be controversial, come from that fact that we are a member of this tribe, and marriage and the family are the core of that. So many of you are here today because joining the church, but some of you are here today joining the church because you're getting married, and I know a couple of you are. And so this is, when I say about marriages need to be fruitful, I'm not talking just about niños and niñas. I'm talking about fruitful to the community, so that when you see a family that is close and strong and living with social justice, it's an inspiration to the rest of us to pull ourselves up and get busy as well. So, and we believe people have a right and duty to participate in society, seeking together the common and good and welfare of all, especially the poor and vulnerable. So it seems to me in life that if you get into the political arena, local works pretty good. Regional, not so good. State, really not very good at all. And when you get to the federal level, everybody's like, oh my God, what are we doing? Are we doing good or are we doing harm? So I encourage people that stay active in the political process, maybe focus more on the local, which sometimes that's what people overlook. But I don't know. I often wake up early in the morning and I click on BGU Cliff in the morning. He has a little talk show there, and he interviews the mayor and he interviews different people. And as I've listened to that, I'm really quite impressed with how Bowling Green seems to be run. Yeah, they have the council and so forth sometimes have their biases, but for the most part, they really are focused on making Bowling Green a better place to live in. And so that's a great thing. And if you ask me the same thing about the state of Ohio, I might be a little bit more dubious, and as far as the country goes, even more so. But here in Bowling Green, at least, you know, that's a step. And if I'm involved in that process to the point of at least voting, then I feel like I'm in there, you know.
Hey, Phil, I'm not really up on politics, but sometimes I think, how many Catholic presidents have we had? Well, I know we've had one. I don't know, you know, after him.
That's it.
Or like you're talking about rules and regulations. I pay attention to the Supreme Court, and I don't know how many Catholics are on that. It's kind of interesting, you know, because
that I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the hierarchy of laws and rules and regulations.
Yeah.
I should find out, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
I won't comment further because I'll get us right in the middle of a big political
Okay.
discussion. All right.
Deacon Phil. It is nice to see that we have Bob Latta as part of our tribe here in BG.
And part of our
as
tribe.
part of the tribe in St. Tom's. And so I really look to him as kind of a leader figure, as part of that community and family, but he's also, you know, our representative in the federal government as well. And so he's part of that system.
I will say for our country that we have representatives and senators. In general, the senator can't get all over the state, but our representatives are local, and so I'm sure Bob looks at it this way, like it or not, he's going to get input from his constituents. It may be good or it may be bad, or they may be praising him or they may be criticizing him, but he's here from time to time, and he does talk to people, and he represents, I would say, the majority will of the constituency. So yeah, we're doubly blessed. Now, having said that, I always have that on me. I can guarantee within our tribe here that if you pick any particular issue, and I'll pick one that's hot at the moment, immigration, you're gonna find opinions like from here to here. Does that mean that some are sinners and therefore by taking this position, pro or con for immigration, that they're going to hell? No. Because people I've talked to, they have their own good reasons for their opinions, and I believe, honestly believe, that no matter which side of the issue they're falling on, they are they have concern for justice. So I will use the words of our illustrious pastor, who at our committee meeting made this statement, which he always comes up with something that kind of, never thought of that. But he was talking about human dignity, the importance of individuals, and he said we not only need to respect the dignity of those who are trying to serve, we need to respect the dignity of those who are against us. Those who are trying to serve and those that are against us. So when we disagree with somebody, it's okay to disagree, but we also have to respect them as individual human beings and see them as individual human beings who are in God's image. And even if they don't agree with me, who I'm always right, how can they not agree with me? We have to think about them and be respectful of them. So this basically is saying, participate in your society as your conscience will allow. And now, the most important social justice issue of all is everybody's entitled to take a break. So let's take a break.
I'm going to draw your attention in today's bulletin